Camden, South Carolina, in the American Revolution. For the first 3 years after the American colonies declared independence from Great Britain, most of the major battles took place in the North. As the newly formed Continental Army faced off against British regulars and American loyalists in Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, the Southern colonies remained relatively secure for the Patriot cause. In South Carolina, the state's Patriot forces defeated the Loyalists in the Snow Campaign of 1775 and withstood the British fleet at the Battle of Sullivan's Island in 1776. It was not until the British implemented their Southern strategy at the end of 1778 that South Carolina once again faced the British Army. The Southern strategy grew out of the British belief that a small but powerful group of revolutionaries had forced the Southern colonies into rebellion. The British thought that, once they defeated the rebel forces in the South, Loyalists could then be relied upon to secure these colonies for the Crown. As each Southern colony came under Loyalist control, the British could then sweep north, surround Washington's armies, isolate the Northern colonies, and end the rebellion. In December of 1778, the British captured Savannah. From this stronghold, they consolidated their control on the Georgia coast and prepared to march into South Carolina. By March of 1780, Charleston was under siege. When the city fell on May 12, over 5,000 Continental soldiers surrendered to the British. Soon thereafter, the British Army's Commander-in-Chief, Sir Henry Clinton, returned to New York and left Lieutenant General Charles Lord Cornwallis in command of the British forces in the South. Cornwallis's orders were to pacify South Carolina and then to march against North Carolina and Virginia. To accomplish this, the British raised several units of Loyalist companies and established a series of fortifications and small garrisons across South Carolina. One of these garrisons included the town of Camden. The post commander was Lieutenant Colonel Francis Lord Rawdon. Rawdon, an Irish nobleman, had participated in every theater of the war with the Americans. He fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill and served under General Clinton in New England, New York, and Philadelphia. Rawdon journeyed south with reinforcements after the fall of Charleston. Soon after his arrival, Cornwallis posted Rawdon to Camden. On August 16, 1780, Camden was the scene of the next major battle between the British and the American forces in South Carolina. In the first Battle of Camden, Major General Horatio Gates led the 2nd Southern Army south toward Camden. His engaging force of about 3,000 men included both veteran Continental soldiers and untried North Carolina and Virginia militia. Cornwallis led his army of more than 1,500 British regulars and 600 Loyalist militia north to meet the Americans. The armies met on the Great North Road near Sanders Creek. Once faced with the professionalism of the British Army, the majority of the American militia retreated, and the battle turned into a rout. In what became the worst American defeat of the Revolution, the British destroyed a 2nd Continental Army in less than 4 months. American casualties were over 900 men killed or wounded, and over 1,000 men captured. The British losses were 234 men killed or wounded. For many, the war in the South seemed lost. After the American retreat at Camden, the only organized forces standing against the British Army in South Carolina were small bands of partisans under Generals Francis Marion and Thomas Sumter. These partisans harassed the British, interrupted their supply lines, and ensured that many of Cornwallis's men remained entrenched in their garrisons. This allowed the Continental Army to regroup, rearm, and re-engage the enemy. In December of 1780, Major General Nathaniel Greene took command of a 3rd Southern Army. Under his leadership, the Patriot Army became a fast-moving force that won several battles and skirmishes during their strategic retreat to the Dan River. Greene's victories breathed new life into the American cause in the South. After chasing Greene's army across the Carolinas and to the Virginia border, Cornwallis's army engaged the Continentals at Guilford Courthouse in March of 1781. Although the British forced Greene's army to retreat once again, Cornwallis's forces were exhausted. The British army broke off their pursuit of the Americans and headed to their garrison at Wilmington, North Carolina. It was then that General Greene made one of the most important decisions of the Revolutionary War. Rather than pursue Lord Cornwallis's British force to Wilmington, Greene resolved to lead the American army back into South Carolina. Greene knew that, if Cornwallis pursued him, North Carolina would remain secure. Should Cornwallis not pursue him, Greene saw an opportunity to strike the British post scattered across the colony. Greene wrote, "All these considerations have determined me to change my route and push directly into South Carolina." The general ordered all of South Carolina's partisan leaders to gather their men in anticipation of cooperating with the Continental Army. In his belief that the best course of action was to move north and cut Greene's supply lines, General Cornwallis decided not to pursue Greene south. Instead, he marched his army to Virginia and left Lieutenant Colonel Rawdon to contend with the Continental Army. On April 19, 1781, the Continental Army once again approached Camden. General Greene ordered Captain Robert Kirkwood and his company of Delaware Continentals to probe the British forces by seizing a cluster of log houses, known as Logtown, 1 mile north of the fortified city. After driving out the British, the Continentals waited for Greene's arrival with the rest of the army. When he arrived, the Continentals abandoned their position at Logtown for a stronger position on Hobkirk's Hill. Knowing that Greene's army was preparing to attack the garrison at Camden, Rawdon believed that it would be foolish to simply wait behind his fortifications. Although he was outnumbered and had little hope of reinforcements, Rawdon chose to attack the strong American position on Hobkirk's Hill. For this attack, Rawdon armed every available man, including 50 convalescent soldiers from the Camden Hospital. His force of less than 950 men left Camden at 10 o'clock on the morning of April 25th. To deceive Greene, the British first marched south, then turned and followed Pine Tree Creek on a northward path towards Greene's forces on Hobkirk's Hill. The British faced an American army that numbered between 1,200 and 1,500 men. Colonel Otho Holland Williams commanded a brigade of 2 Maryland Continental regiments and Kirkwood's 40 Delaware Continentals. Brigadier General Isaac Hugh G. led 2 regiments of Virginia Continentals. They were supported by Lieutenant Colonel William Washington's cavalry unit, 3 pieces of artillery, and a regiment of North Carolina militia. The veteran armies battled it out on Hobkirk's Hill, with first the British and then the Americans seeming to have the advantage. Finally, as American victory seemed assured, a Loyalist sharpshooter killed an officer of the 1st Maryland, which threw the American units into confusion. As a result, Greene ordered his men to fall back, and Rawdon's troops surged forward and occupied the hill. With the British troops holding the summit of Hobkirk's Hill and his own army in disarray, Greene decided to retreat. He later wrote that the troops had got into too much disorder to recover the fortune of the day. Greene's army withdrew 3 miles away, but remained a cohesive fighting force. Rawdon, believing that his army was too small to venture any further from their fortifications, withdrew back to Camden. British losses in the Battle of Hobkirk's Hill were 258 killed, wounded, or missing. American casualties were 269 killed, wounded, or missing. Even though the British defeated the American army at Hobkirk's Hill, they gained nothing from their victory. 2 days earlier, on April 23rd, the British garrison at Fort Watson on the Santee River had surrendered to General Francis Marion's partisans and Colonel Henry Lee's Continental troops. The loss of Fort Watson cut the British line of communications between Charleston and Camden. With the supply line severed, Greene's army to the north, Marion and Lee to the southeast, and other partisans active in the west, Rawdon knew he could not hold his position without risking the loss of his army. On May 10th, Rawdon ordered the evacuation of Camden, and his forces marched back toward Charleston. After the Battle of Hobkirk's Hill, there were dozens of battles and skirmishes in South Carolina as the British Army slowly withdrew to Charleston, leaving the Americans in control of the interior. In December 1782, the British evacuated Charleston. 9 months later, in September 1783, the Treaty of Paris ended the American Revolutionary War.